It's 1987, and the Smiths are, by almost any measure, one of the most important bands in Britain. They've released a run of records that critics and fans still talk about as if they were sacred texts. Morrissey has become one of the most instantly recognizable voices in British music. Not just his singing voice, but his persona, his wit, his refusal to be like anyone else. Johnny Marr, barely in his mid-20s, is already being talked about as one of the defining guitarists of his generation.
I'm Steven, and I wanted to know that since your last American concert tour, do you feel more comfortable and at ease with your American fans?
Yes, I do. I do, because it's grown larger than I expected it to, and I'm very excited by that. Because
Together, their songs have built something rare, an audience that doesn't just enjoy the music, but feels understood by it. And yet, behind the scenes, it's falling apart. Here's the strange part. The Smiths didn't collapse because they ran out of ideas. They didn't fade because the audience stopped caring. They didn't become irrelevant. If anything, they broke apart at the exact moment the world was catching up to how good they were. Then it happens. Johnny Marr leaves the band. Rumors spread faster than anyone can confirm or deny them. The remaining members are left in limbo, unsure if this is a pause or an ending. Within months, one of the most influential bands Britain has ever produced is finished. But was Johnny Marr really the reason the Smiths ended? Or had the band been quietly falling apart long before anyone finally walked out the door? To understand that, we have to go back to Manchester, before the hit records, before the arguments, before Morrissey and Marr had any idea what they were about to build together. Stephen Morrissey grew up in Manchester feeling like he didn't quite belong to it. While the world around him moved to its own rhythms, he retreated into books, films, and pop records, building an inner world that was, in a lot of ways, richer than his outer one. He was obsessed with outsider figures, people who stood apart, who said the things others wouldn't.
You're doing interviews such as this, and you're changing record companies and things like that. I thought perhaps it worked the other way around, that you're becoming reconciled to having to do all those things.
Not really. I still have faith in the records themselves. So there are really separate worlds within this great big balloon, really.
He tried his hand at music before, in fits and starts, without much to show for it. But even without a career, Morrissey already had something most people spend years trying to find: an identity. He had ideas, he had opinions, fully formed and razor sharp. He had a voice, in both senses of the word. What he didn't have was someone who could turn all of that into music. That's where Johnny Marr comes in. Marr was younger than Morrissey, and where Morrissey's world was literary and theatrical, Marr's was built entirely around sound. He was consumed by the guitar, by songwriting, by the idea of building a band that could be his way out of Manchester. He wasn't chasing a persona, he was chasing a sound nobody else was making yet. Put simply, Morrissey knew exactly what he wanted to say. Marr knew how to make it sound like nothing else on the radio. Separately, they were just two ambitious young men trying to carve out space in British music. Together, they were about to become the center of something much bigger than either of them could have built alone. The way it happened almost sounds too casual to matter. Marr, driven by instinct as much as plan, went looking for Morrissey. They started talking. Music became the shared language almost immediately, and before long, the two of them were writing together.
How do you feel about the fans that fight and push their way to get on stage with you?
well, I'm very, very honoured, to be honest.
Yes,
Lots of people do complain about them.
I'm one of them.
Oh, well. And like security people always complain about it, but I don't really understand it. I don't really understand the complaints. I just think it's the biggest compliment that anybody can pay.
Yeah,
Together. This wasn't destiny. Their personalities were nothing alike. Their strengths pulled in different directions. Their ambitions weren't even shaped the same way. And yet, creatively, something clicked almost instantly, the kind of chemistry that's genuinely rare and that neither of them could have predicted walking in. Soon the lineup filled out. Mike Joyce joined on drums. Andy Rourke joined on bass. Four very different people, from very different corners of the same city, suddenly formed one band. For a while, their differences weren't a liability. They were the whole engine: Morrissey's strangeness, Marr's precision, Rourke and Joyce's chemistry as a rhythm section. It all worked because none of them were trying to be the same kind of musician. The problem is, those same differences that made the band special were never going to stay easy forever. The Smiths' early rise happened fast, at least by the standards of the underground scene they came out of. Small gigs, a deal with the independent label Rough Trade, early singles like Hand in Glove.
Do you not condone a video as an entertainment vehicle?
Yes, but certainly quite separate from popular music.
And separate from your group?
Yes.
That immediately signaled this band sounded like nothing else in the room. And that's the part worth sitting with, how different they actually sounded. British pop in the early 80s was dominated by synthesizers, drum machines, and glossy production. The Smiths went the opposite direction entirely. Marr built layered, intricate, almost orchestral guitar parts using a traditional rock lineup, while Morrissey sang about loneliness, repression, humor, longing, and being from a place nobody glamorized. The combination, melancholy wrapped in wit, vulnerability delivered with total confidence, gave listeners something they weren't getting anywhere else. The Smiths weren't just selling songs. They were handing a very specific kind of listener a language for feelings they didn't have words for. Isolation, awkwardness, romantic frustration, quiet anger, the sense of being on the outside looking in. That connection is what turned a cult following into a movement.
Now, I understand that Girlfriend in a Coma is likely to be the next single.
Yes, it is.
Girlfriend in a Coma?
Yes.
I mean, are you sending up your own gloomy image here, or is it designed deliberately to provoke the people on radio stations who don't play your records? Or?
No, it isn't. It isn't designed to provoke anybody at all. I think with the escalation of the use of drugs, that there are...
But here's the twist nobody clocked at the time. The more successful the band became, the more strain it put on the one relationship, Morrissey and Marr, that had built it in the first place. Between their self-titled debut, Meat is Murder, and The Queen is Dead, the Smiths went from a promising underground act to a band that critics were already calling one of the most important of the decade. Each record pushed the songwriting further. Each record deepened the fan obsession. This wasn't slow-building word of mouth anymore. It was momentum with real weight behind it. Inside the machine, the roles were clear. Morrissey was the public face. The lyrics, the identity, the provocation that kept journalists writing about them constantly. Marr was the musical architect, the one responsible for the arrangement.
Dave, I was just wondering if your fear of the camera's diminishing these days.
Fear of the camera?
Yeah.
Yes, but only slightly. That's all. Only slightly.
The guitar textures, and increasingly an enormous share of the actual songwriting labor. Rourke and Joyce gave the band its distinctive rhythmic identity, the pulse underneath everything else. From the outside, it looked unstoppable. Four young men from Manchester, defining a sound an entire generation would spend decades trying to imitate. But inside the band, success was quietly creating new problems. The workload kept increasing. Expectations kept rising with every release. Touring became exhausting in a way that doesn't show up in the photos. Morrissey's public persona kept expanding, larger than life, harder to separate from the band itself. And Marr was carrying more and more of the creative weight, record after record, with less time to breathe between them. The band was getting bigger, but the space inside it, the room each of them had to just exist as people, was getting smaller. This is where the story shifts from triumph to strain. Start with Johnny Marr's workload, constant writing, constant recording, constant touring, and underneath all of it, the pressure of knowing that whatever came next had to top what came before. This wasn't just a guitarist playing in a successful band.
Surely a video is just our contemporary age's method of advertising their record, the same way as a funny coloured label was in the 20s for a jazz record.
I think it's a little bit more serious than that, and I think it's a little bit more dangerous than that. Because so many people will, when groups release records, so many people will discuss the video before they actually discuss the record.
Marr was functionally running the creative engine of one of the fastest rising groups in the country, night after night, album after album. Then there's the changing relationship between Morrissey and Marr. It's tempting to look for one dramatic blow-up, one argument that explains everything, but that's not really how it worked. It was accumulated pressure. Two very different personalities, with two very different ways of processing success, slowly drifting further apart under the weight of it. And then there's the layer people talk about far less, the band's management and business environment. Contracts, finances, decisions made under pressure and time constraints, the unglamorous machinery running underneath the music. This is where the story stops being a simple Morrissey and Marr fell out narrative, because that explanation, however tidy, was never the whole truth. The pressure on the Smiths had multiple sources, stacking on top of each other. And while the public was busy speculating about tension between the band's two most famous members, another problem, closer to home, was already threatening to break the group apart. Andy Rourke's personal struggles during this period led to his temporary removal from the band.
And people will, in fact, not want to copy it unless they're doing all the things on the video, and you sort of learn it themselves rather than copy.
I don't know.
Yes, I think would have been a good answer there, yes.
Paul, back to you.
Well, I'm just thinking what Morrissey was saying about the down-to-earth nature of the group. The name is a perfect example, isn't it?
Yes, it really had to be as basic as humanly possible, so...
A moment that's easy to sensationalize, but more useful to understand as a symptom of something larger. By this point, the Smiths weren't just four friends chasing a shared dream anymore. They were a business, a cultural phenomenon, a high-pressure creative operation with real financial stakes riding on every decision. And in the middle of all that, one of the band's original members was suddenly out. Rourke did return, but something had shifted. The band could put the lineup back together, but it couldn't simply rewind the trust, the ease, the sense of four people just making music together back to what it had been before. And as the internal pressure kept mounting, Johnny Marr started looking outside the band for something he hadn't had in years: room to breathe. Marr began taking on more work and collaborations outside the Smiths. The important part of this isn't the specific projects themselves, it's what they represented. For the first time since the band began, the partnership with Morrissey wasn't the only creative outlet in Marr's life. That shift didn't go unnoticed. The press picked up on it, and speculation started circulating about whether the band would continue, whether Marr was unhappy, whether the group was still aligned in the way it once had been. Rumor became its own kind of pressure, feeding back into the band itself. Marr was exhausted. The band was under mounting internal strain. The public wanted more records, more shows, more of everything. The press was watching every move for a sign of collapse. And the relationship sitting at the very center of the band, the one that had started it all, was no longer as simple as it had been back in Manchester. Then, in 1987, the rumors stopped being rumors. This is the moment everything had been building toward. It's tempting to frame Marr's departure as a single decision made on a single day, one guitarist waking up and deciding to end one of Britain's most important bands. But that flattens what actually happened. The departure was the result of pressures that had been building for a long time: exhaustion, creative overload, personal strain, outside commitments pulling at his attention, and communication inside the band that had quietly broken down over months, not moments. Whatever the exact combination of reasons, the outcome was the same. The man who had helped build the sound of the Smiths, the guitar work that made them instantly recognizable, was gone. That left an impossible question hanging over everyone involved. Could the Smiths still be the Smiths without Johnny Marr? For a moment, it looked like the band might find a way to survive the loss. But by the time anyone tried to answer that question seriously, the damage had already gone too far. In the immediate aftermath, the remaining members tried to figure out what came next. Morrissey reportedly considered continuing in some form. There were attempts to move forward, to find a way to keep something of the band alive. But the essential chemistry, the thing that made the Smiths sound like the Smiths, was gone. And without it, there wasn't really a path forward. The Smiths officially came to an end. Here's the irony worth sitting with. This band survived controversy. They survived hostile press. They survived internal tension for years. What they couldn't survive was the loss of the one relationship that had defined their identity from the very beginning. And that's really where the answer to this whole story starts to take shape. Morrissey moved into a substantial solo career, proving that his identity and his audience could survive without the Smiths behind him, even if the sound that followed was never quite the same. Johnny Marr built an entire second act in music, work with the band Electronic, his own project The Healers, and years of collaborations and solo records that followed. He didn't disappear after the Smiths. If anything, he kept working at a pace few guitarists manage across an entire career. Andy Rourke continued making music and collaborating with other artists in the years that followed, carrying his distinctive bass playing into new projects. Mike Joyce also continued his career, though his name became attached to something else entirely, a legal dispute over royalties that would drag on for years, and that added a bitter, complicated postscript to the band's legacy. Because here's the thing, the story didn't end when the band did. In some ways, the legal battles and public disputes that followed did more lasting damage to any hope of reconciliation than the original breakup ever did. So, why couldn't they stay together? Not because of one argument, not because of one person, and not because the audience ever stopped caring. The truth is messier than that. Several pressures collided at once: exhaustion, creative imbalance, personality differences, outside opportunities pulling people in different directions, communication that quietly broke down, business and management strain, personal struggles, and a partnership between two people that simply became harder and harder to sustain. Maybe the greatest strength of the Smiths was also their greatest weakness. Their sound depended on a combination that almost never happens: Morrissey's words, Marr's music, Rourke's bass, Joyce's rhythm. Four people who for a handful of extraordinary years made something none of them could have made alone. But sometimes the exact chemistry that creates something extraordinary was never built to last.
Dil Kaid is near. Some.
The Smiths couldn't stay together, but maybe that's exactly why their time together still feels so impossible to replace.